Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. Today is the 4th of July, 2024. It's the 10th anniversary of the Wealthsteading Podcast, episode 449. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder, money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Wealthsteading Podcast, I've got a quick episode for you today, but in its brevity is the soul of wealth building wisdom. I think it sums up the message of the last 10 years of the podcast. It's an even more tough love version of the simple 3-step wealth building principles that I always talk about. And I've distilled that down over the years to just 3 simple words: earn, save, invest. And what I've learned over these 10 years of hosting the podcast, I've had a chance to communicate with literally thousands of you. Whether it's people that I met in person as I've traveled across the country, or those of you where we've exchanged phone calls or emails, what I've learned the most over dealing with people is of that simple concept of earn, save, invest. The most important element by far is the savings part. And it's even more important than I thought it was years ago. Yes, of course, earning and investing are important. And of course, everybody wants to talk about investing. That's why everybody wants to know where they can invest $1,000, which, I think is the number one all-time dumbest listener question. But what I've come to realize over the years is that really the only thing, the absolute only thing that distinguishes someone like me who's built what I would consider a, pretty substantial net worth. The only difference between me and people that are broke really comes down to the savings part. And I'm talking savings is probably 80% of what you need to do to become financially independent or to become wealthy. Yes, again, of course, you have to earn the money before you can save it, and you have to invest it wisely. But really, I think those 2 elements just come down to maybe 20% of the overall equation. And I say that based on all the conversations and interaction I've had with people that have listened to this podcast or other people that I've met as a result of hosting this podcast. And it really comes down to not having the discipline to save. And this is a theme that you've heard me talk about over these many years. But again, it is even more critical than I ever thought. I could go through all the examples of people that have won the lottery or celebrity type people that have made millions of dollars, whether they be athletes or performing artists, that despite all the money they had at one time, they still end up going broke. And that's really the state of most people. The reason people go broke isn't because they don't have money. It's because they can't hold on to it. It's not that they don't know how to invest or they have an inability to manage money. The bottom line is they just can't manage themselves. They don't have the discipline to control their spending. Financial independence is literally available to anyone. That message is the reason that I started this podcast 10 years ago on the 4th of July. Because to me, financial independence is the same thing as freedom. And I truly believe that it's attainable for anyone. And the reason this is attainable by anyone is simply mathematics. Everybody is living at a certain cost of living basis. For some people, that may be $20,000. Other people, it may be $200,000. But you're living at a certain cost basis. And you can achieve financial independence by simply having 10 years of that. Now, I say simply, obviously it's not simple. It takes discipline because most people never do it. Certainly less than 10% of people do it, maybe closer to only 5%. But you can be in that 5 or 10% range, regardless of your situation, because it just requires the discipline to save a portion of what you earn, which again, most people never do. Look at the surveys about net worth and spending patterns. Depending upon the demographic, close to 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck. And again, that's people making minimum wage, and that's people making high income earnings as well. Just because you make $300,000 a year doesn't make you wealthy if you're spending $325,000 a year. But think of it this way, regardless of where you're starting, if you put a percentage of your earnings away, then over a period of time, you can't achieve that 10 times earnings ratio. Now, in the old days, if you remember the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, he talked about paying yourself first and saving 10%. Well, that's certainly important, but I think because of the tax burden that we suffer in this current modern era, you got to be saving more like 15 to 20%. And that's too much of a barrier for most people. They simply don't have the discipline to save that much of their overall income. But if you do that, regardless of how much you make, or even regardless of how well of a good investor you are, you can attain the early stages of financial independence by simply saving that 15 to 20% if you save it long enough. And when you do that, when you have that kind of a snowball effect of saving and building wealth, then you are truly financially independent because of the time value of money and the miracle of compounding interest. And that math works out irregardless of whether you're making $50,000 a year or $200,000 a year. The percentages work out the same. It really boils down to having the discipline to save. And the reason I say that it's 80% of the equation to becoming wealthy is because, again, over these last 10 years, as I've interacted with thousands of people, I found out that those that have that discipline to save are in the minority of the minority. But it's literally that simple. If you want to be wealthy, you have to start today by saving a large percentage of your income. You have to pay yourself first. Hey, let me end this and sum things up with a quick story about my grandfather. And if you've listened to the early versions of the Wealthsteading Podcast, you know in the early days, I talked quite a bit about what my grandfathers taught me. Incidentally, all those episodes are available. They're all free. None of them are behind any type of a paywall or anything. You just have to go to wealthsteading.com, and there's a search tool there where you can search on particular topics, or if you know the particular episode you want to listen to. For example, the first 10 episodes of this podcast are where I developed and talked about my 10 wealth building principles. If you want to listen to those, you can simply put in wealthsteading.com/ and the number 1 or the number 3 or the number 10. Using that method will take you to any of the episodes. For example, if you wanted to listen to today's episode, you could put in wealthsteading.com/ and then the number 449. It's all there. It's all available. If you're just going through a podcast distribution type software, you're only going to see the last 100 episodes of the podcast. But all 449 episodes are available at the website. In any case, in the early days, I talked a lot about what I learned from my grandfathers. Don't do that as much anymore, but I think that's because over these past 10 years, I've actually become a grandfather myself, and rather than tell you what I've learned from my grandfathers, I just tell you what I know. Hey, speaking of becoming a grandfather, we recently had our 12th grandchild, so now we're up to the dirty dozen. Let me tell you, of all my wealth, it's children that pay the greatest and the eternal dividends. The real measure of wealth is about the things that you have that can't be bought with money. But I digress. Hey, in any case, my Italian grandfather had an extraordinary and amazing life. He came to this country as an immigrant, penniless, unable to speak the language, and although he never became rich, he did become what I would consider financially independent in his own right, because he lived a long and healthy and very happy life, even though it was on, what we would consider a minuscule type income. Incidentally, you can listen to the episode about his amazing and challenging life on episode 315. But he used to tell me that he came to America as a teenager because he believed that the roads were paved with gold, and he thought he could come here and become rich. Well, when he got here, he obviously found out that it was a myth, that the roads weren't paved with gold. And while that discouraged him at first, he came to realize that he could still become wealthy and have a fantastic lifestyle, a lifestyle much better than the impoverished little Italian village that he lived in southern Italy. He could have that better lifestyle in America, not because the roads were paved with gold, but rather because the roads were paved with asphalt. And that asphalt meant that there were a great deal of jobs and opportunities available in the here and now. And if you were willing to work and work hard and save your money, then you could create your own gold. It was not that the roads were paved with gold, it's that there existed a golden opportunity. And it was there for everyone, if they were willing to work to get it. And the moral of that story is as true today as it was when he told it to me some 50 years ago. The roads aren't paved with gold, they're paved with asphalt. And that opportunity is available for everyone, and if you don't achieve it, it's your own asphalt. It doesn't matter what politicians in the White House, or who controls the Senate or the Congress, or that your boss is a jerk, or that your ex-spouse ruined your life, or that the man's holding you down, or this or that. Listen, I've heard all the excuses over the last 10 years from the people that can't save money. But the bottom line is, there is that cohort of you out there that are saving. You have the discipline. And you, my friend, you are the ones that are on the road to becoming financially independent. Well, it's probably not the message that most people wanted to hear, but that's kind of the tradition of the 10 years of the Wealthsteading Podcast. I appreciate those of you that have been with me since the very beginning, and those of you that continue to listen. And God willing, we'll be able to do it for the next decade as well. Hey, until then, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.